Hello and welcome to this little lesson on painting the spring daffodil. This is one of my favorite flowers to paint, and so I thought for one of my new tutorials for my Patreons we would do the daffodil. So this lesson will be available on YouTube for a few days, and then I'll take it down and it'll be exclusive to my Patreon members. You can join for as little as $10 and paint these little short lessons. And for longer lessons, full-length lessons on animals and birds, you can join the $29 tier or $59 for new lessons every month. So let's get into this. I've got out my colors here. I've got out white, black, and I've listed all my colors along the side here and tried to match them accordingly to the paint. I've got Indian yellow, cad yellow light, yellow ochre, orange, quinacridone red, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, trans oxide red, transparent oxide brown, sap green, viridian green, and then I put out some fun colors because I want to play with a background that I really like. So I put out some dioxazine violet and phthalo turquoise. And I did this painting a few years ago, and I really liked the blue wash I did, so I thought we'll try that again. Sometimes you have to go back to your old paintings to see, you know, what it is that you really enjoyed about what you know, when you do something good, go back and look at it and see what it was you did so you can do it again. Sometimes if you get on a streak where you feel like you're just not painting good, or you know, you get into a bit of an art funk, you just feel like you're not painting as well, just go back and find a painting you really did well on and do it again. So I'm going to put out some phthalo turquoise, and I'm going to use a little turp, and I think I dulled it with some transparent brown oxide, so I'm just going to add a little bit of that and maybe a little viridian green in it. So it's just a little combo of viridian, phthalo turquoise, and a little touch of that transparent brown oxide. So I'm going to just start by adding some of this fun color to my board. And by the way, these are those ampersand gesso boards, and they come in 4 packs, and I'll put a link to that in the description so that you can buy them from Dick Blick. For these little studies, they are very useful. So once I get a bit of that color down, I'm just going to wipe off some of that, just so you can see what's happening. And I just want this background to be, you know, fun. It's a spring painting, so I just want to have some different color in the background like that. And if you don't get enough turp on there, sometimes it's harder to spread it to the edges, so I'm just going to add a bit more just to get rid of that white. It just makes it easier later on. Okay. Alrighty, now I've got it all covered. So that's a really fun color to use. Just going to make sure, I'm going to look at my reference. I'll put the reference to this other painting in there too. Yeah, I'm just making sure that's pretty much it. Mine's this is a little more turquoise than that one, but I don't really care. I might wipe off a little bit or add some brighter colors later. Next I'm going to switch brushes, and I've got a number 4. I like using number 4, so I'll always kind of try to remember to put out 2 of them. So I have one for, you know, like if I'm painting with white, I usually just have a separate brush for white, It just saves you time having to sit and rinse out the white in your brush if you're going to switch to like yellow or something else. So first of all, I'm going to get a little transparent brown oxide, and I'm going to just look at the shape of this thing and really show you how I would sketch this out. So I'm just going to add a little Viridian, a little brown oxide, just something kind of neutral to draw with. And so when you're looking at the daffodil, one thing to really take note of is the petal structure. So you got 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And it's like someone took this one and just rotated it to fit between. So always pay attention to the major shape. So there's a big, triangular shape there and kind of another triangle here. So I kind of will pay attention to that angle because I really want to capture that kind of drooping over look that it has. So I'm just going to go and put sort of where the top part of that flower is going to go, maybe about there, or higher, and then you've got this kind of angle that's roughly about like that. So just gonna look at that angle, and so there's one corner there, and if the tip is here, there's a tip there, and then if you look at your reference photo, you'll notice that you can kind of line those up and see, okay, how far over is this yellow part, and how far away is the tip of that yellow part away from this, where these two connect. So I'm going to kind of gauge it by looking at how those points line up, because that will help me with my drawing. Sometimes it's hard because you put this one way over here, but if you know that when you line your paintbrush up, those two kind of line up, that helps. And then it kind of comes up like that. And then we got a petal that's really just kind of crunkled over right here. And then that one comes around. And I'm just going to kind of draw them in as best I can, and then I can kind of tweak my drawing a little. And my mistake is usually I draw flowers a little on the big side because I get over enthusiastic when I'm starting out. So this one has to be a little smaller. And there's the angle, the way these petals come into the center. They kind of both come in like that. And then this comes further out. You just sort of have to start somewhere, You don't know kind of where you're going at first, but then you just sort of... So I'm going to look at my reference photo and compare what my basic feeling is, and I think this flower is a little on the wide side, so this has to be a little smaller here. So I can just kind of dab some of that away. And so that's a little smaller. And then this comes in a little bit shorter here, because I'm kind of gauging, I'm looking at how those lines match up on my reference photo, and I had that too far. And at this point I want to kind of put in that center, just so I can also help see where I'm going with this a little better. And this comes a little more up. And I'm looking at that, the angles, how they come in towards that flower center. And this comes in here. Like that. And they have these kind of center, you know, veins that come down the middle. Okay, so that's starting to get there. And then you've got all these pretty green leaves. I'm going to use just, I'm not going to draw those. I'll put those in later with some, just a brush stroke. So I usually, with a lot of flowers, I'll usually just wing it. I'll sort of, you know, put in a sunflower without drawing. But with these, I want to go a little slower so that we can all keep up and not get too overwhelmed. So the main thing is, my drawing isn't by any means perfect, but you can see that triangle there, and then you've got that other triangle of petals there. And we'll be able to see it better once we get some paint in. So I think that's a good start. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start blocking in some of that center. I like starting with the center with flowers, because if you don't have the center where it belongs, the whole flower, you know, will be off kilter. So I'm just going to use a little of this red oxide. You could add a little touch of iridium to it, because there is kind of a greeny brown in there. And I'm just going to block that center in with that darker color like that. Now I'm going to go get some of my cad yellow light, and I'm going to blend that into that color, that mixture of the transparent red oxide and viridian. And I'm going to use this mixture, but I know that this paint is still pretty thick, so I can use it as well to blend. So I'm going to go and just blend in a little bit of that paint, and I'm using those first brush strokes to kind of blend. So we've got that. And then we've got a bright yellow for where the sunlight's really hitting this leaf. So I'm going to just get some yellow. And you could add a touch of yellow ochre to it. And just block in the rest of that the center there. So I'm only looking at, you know, the big shapes of color, and I'm looking at the value as being really important. So making sure that's real dark, moving to the light, and then you can tweak some of the smaller shapes later. But I want to get now some of that light edge in there so that we can see it. So I'll use a little bit of orange and some of that yellow, just because I see a lot of an orange color. Maybe add a little red oxide to darken it a tiny bit, because if you squint down, it's quite dark, that little ridge. So I'm going to add some of that ruffly edge in, just by adding a little bit of this orange color. And if you don't like it that orange, just get some of the red oxide in there, and you can you can just kind of add some different values in there. You can darken it a little. So now you can sort of see what's going on a little better. There's a little bit of the, you know, the back of this showing. I'm just going to use a little bit of yellow ochre for that. Maybe a tiny bit of that yellow light. I'm just going to put a little bit of that part of the cone that's showing the little flute that's coming out. And then you could use some of your darker mix just to, well, maybe it has to be darker. Just kind of put something to show the back of it there. Okay, so now I'm going to let that set because this is kind of, you know, the paint's pretty wet and thick. I'll just let that sit for a bit, and I'm going to add some more shadows and color to the white. So I'm going to, I'll switch brushes and go to another 4 flat just so I have a clean brush for the white. And this is one of those greeny gray mixes that I did in my how to mix gray mixes video that you can find on my channel, my YouTube channel. But it's really good for flowers, so I'm going to use some white and viridian and a little bit of brown oxide, and we'll mix up kind of a nice warm kind of greeny gray for those shadows, and I'll see if how that looks. It's probably a little too light, so I'm going to mix up some more using just some more of those same colors, the viridian and the brown oxide. And I'll add a little yellow ochre to it to give it a warmer look. So I'll put that in, and I'm going to put just a little bit in the shadows, and I'm going to add a little more viridian to it just to darken it a little more. And oh, that looks too brown now, so add a little more viridian. And wherever there's some shadow, I'm going to put a little bit of this color in. I might even add a little cobalt right in this area here to my gray mix. And I'm just going to put some of that in there. And there's a real intense shadow up in here. I can adjust the values later, but I want to make sure it's dark enough up here. And now I'm going to get some white and a little bit of that yellow ochre, and I'm going to block in some of those lighter areas. And I'm looking at the way the flower goes. There's kind of the way the veins on this flower go. They kind of come down and on an angle like that. So you don't have to get it exact, but as long as you get a little bit of the authenticity of it, you're doing good. And just gonna keep adding some of that lighter white color. Like that. Keeping in mind the brush stroke. And then I'll go get some of this darker grayish mix, which again is just some Viridian. You can use brown or red oxide, and just get some of that. That petal's quite dark, so I'm just gonna kind of put it in there like that. There's some shadow in here. And the whole thing I liked about that painting was the looseness of the brush strokes and everything. So I'm trying not to overdo it with the brush strokes. There's a real highlight on this one. And this petal comes in front of this other petal, so I've got to make sure we show that off. And then this up here, I'm just going to kind of put a tip on it to show that it's curling over. So just a simple brush stroke there. And keep the shadow in there. Don't go and paint that over. You want to keep the dark, and then just put that tip there. And then we can take a brush and just sort of pull some of that yellow. Let me clean my brush off a bit better, but you get some of that yellow mix and just put a little bit of that reflected yellow light in that. Now I can sort of see the shape a little better of the overall shape, and I can tweak it a little bit better. Now at this point you're kind of just, everything's just sort of blocking in, but you can sort of now start to see the different petal shapes. So you want to make sure you look at your reference photo and just make sure that, you know, you show this one is on top of this one, and this one is on top of those two. So you can kind of pull out and put the shadow into the right spaces. Before I go and do that, I'm just going to block in some of the green. So I'll get some of that sap green, and I'm going to use a wider brush, like this number 8 brush, and I just want to make those strokes pretty. I'll add a little Indian yellow, and I'm going to put them in dark first. So I've got this little thing here that kind of blocks me from doing it, but I'm going to just put a few loose brush strokes behind this flower. So I'll start with, you know, something like this. Just put some of those daffodil-like leaves behind there. You can get some with the Viridian green and put a few in. And again, we just want them real loose and impressionistic. We're not, the whole fun part of this painting is sort of the freshness of the daffodil and the brush strokes on these, everything just being really kind of, you know, just an impression. So get some more paint, and you can get some turp on your brush if that helps your brush to kind of glide better. So I kind of like that for now. And then you can get a fan brush or a mop brush, or I just will sometimes use this piece of paper towel like this and just sort of mess it up a little. And just turn your paper towel in and really loosen up those brush strokes even more. Okay, that looks more interesting. And it did. And now having those darker green values is going to help with the values in our flower to compare. When you just have that bright blue background, it's kind of a little hard to work with. It's hard to see what you're doing. So I had to get rid of that. It was kind of looking like I was working on a Andy Warhol painting or something. Okay, so I'm going to keep working on these white leaves a little more, petals I mean. I'm going to just I feel like the shadow kept coming out a little too cool. So I want to first bring out, okay, what petals in front and what is behind, and then I want to kind of tweak those colors a little. Sometimes depending on the light you're working in, it can just look too icy. So I'm going to add a little orange to my white paint and see if that helps a little. And I'm going to bring this petal out. It's above there, so I'm just going to mark it kind of off where I want it to go, and the angle I want it to go in. So this is sort of the angle it's coming out from behind. And I've got enough paint underneath there to kind of blend in. So just gonna get the basic shapes in there first. So I want to make sure this is above this one, so it's catching the light up here. And this one's out here. Just make sure I get the angle right. And I'm just going to put the edge of light on this one. Get a little more white in that mix. Maybe a tiny dab of yellow just to brighten it. Just a tiny, tiny dab. And I'm going to get some light on that edge there. And then we got a light edge over here. Even if it's too big, you can shape it with the shadow color later, but it's just to give your eye, again, you're just building the value and you're showing those light and shadow marks. There's some light coming through here. And get that in there. Okay, so now I can sort of, let me just fix this one. I can sort of see where everything's going. At this stage, I can see what petals are in front and what ones are behind. And I've got the basic structure there. Now this one comes over here. So I feel like that's good. We've got, you know, everything is sort of in its place, but now we've got to kind of work on these shadow colors a little. And get this edge in a bit better. And I want to work on adding some more color to the center. Okay, so the basic structure's there. Now we gotta work on the color a little more. So just gonna get some of this warmer, lighter mixture and sort of block in a little more of that shadow there. And then add back. There's a real bright that area there is sort of tricky because the light's coming on this petal, but this petal's above it, so you wanna, this shadow needs to be a lot darker. So I'm going to use a bit of a different color too. I'll use a bit of cobalt and yellow ochre. That'll give you a nice kind of greeny gray right away that I can get in there. That needs to be, if you squint down, you can see that the color needed to be darker, that shadow there. Okay, and then I'm going to get a little bit of this this lighter gray mix, and if I squint down, I need to lighten this petal that the light's coming through. So I'm going to use a bit of that gray mix and add a little yellow to it, and just lighten this up a little right in here. Where the light's coming through. Like that. I'm just kind of lighten that up a little. And just, again, I'm looking at my reference and it's going to get a little bit of a darker shadow in there. So I'll put some yellow ochre, viridian, cobalt, and white, and you'll get sort of a dark, warm shadow color there. And the shadow over on this side is more of a blue, and the shadow up here is a warmer, kind of more yellowy color. I'll put a little cobalt in that mix for up here. It gets a little blue. Okay, now I wanna make that more interesting, so I'm gonna add a little white and cobalt blue, and we'll see, into that same gray mix, and make it a little more blue. It looks a lot bluer in the photo down here, so this shadow is gonna be more blue. And I might add a bit of that up in here too, some of that light bluey shadow mix. And here where there's a kind of a darker shadow color. And now I'm going to go back and add some more color to the center. So I'm going to get some of that cad yellow light, and I'm just going to use some of that straight on here, and I'm going to pull some of that to the inside of my flower to really get some of that bright yellow going in there. And then I'm going to add a bit of that, just dab it around the edge of that flower where it's kind of ruffly. Just dab that around. It kind of makes it look like it's catching light on the outside there. And I'll get a little more of this yellow ochre and kind of add that in to the shadow. And then you could take a little bit of that orange and just kind of pull some of that into that bright yellow, and even put a few dabs of it up here. And just sort of looking at my reference photo, I'm kind of bringing that light in where I see it into the rest of the flower there. And this shadow area, just lightening it a little bit. It was a little dark. And then I'm going to take my brush and just sort of blend that area a bit. And then I'll get some white and cad yellow light and just sort of get a real bright area in here. Okay, and just sort of bring this shape a little, make it a little rounder. It just kind of got too square, so let's round that up a little. And if you get yellow paint in there, just wipe your brush and kind of, you can get some more of that red oxide and put a real dark mark in there to get it back in there. And add to your little ruffly edge with some of this real bright white and cad yellow light mix, and that'll give it some real dimension there. So for the center, for those this little stamen, I just use a little yellow ochre, and make sure your brush doesn't have a clump of it. And I'll just kind of put a little mark of that going from the center out there, and then get a little bit of that yellow ochre, white. You can use a bit of that cad yellow light, and you can put a little hint of a highlight, you know, on the edge of it where you can see. Let me get more white in there just to show off that little impression of that stamen coming out. You don't want to get too detailed with it, but kind of get something in there. Okay, and I'm going to now go and add a little more detail to the greens back here. I'll add a little white and some viridian to get some of those real bluey daffodil marks in there. So I'm going to just take my brush and drag it up and, you know, make some lighter highlights there. I might even add a little bit of that phthalo blue into it to get a real kind of some of those turquoisey colors in there. So I'll put a little bit of that. I'll pick some of the edges out of them and just make some lighter marks. And then the ones closer to the bottom are more yellowy green. So I'll just drag some, I added a little bit of the yellow paint color to my mix. And I'm just gonna and then you can loosen those up again with the edge of your paper towel or whatever you want to use to soften those marks up. Okay, now with your green, once you do that, you can look at the values again and get some sap and something to darken it. Use some dioxazine violet maybe and some sap, and really go in and put a few dark values right near the petal there, and under the shadow here just put a few notes of real dark shadow, and that'll really start to pop those petals forward. And get some more dioxazine, some sap, and just pop in another note of real dark in there. And that really adds a lot of dimension to your painting. Maybe even a tiniest little super dark in there. Okay. Alrighty, so now I'm just going to go back to the white flower, and I want to add some more light to those lighter areas. So get some white, and you can dab a little of that cad yellow in there. Just put a few real light highlights. And again, we want to go for the impressionistic look. So just, you can put a mark down and leave it, you know. And just going to put a little ruffly edge on here, and then wipe your brush off if you get, you know, too much green paint on there. And same there. And on this edge too, put a little. So I'm just building some of those lighter values and kind of ruffling those edges a little. Okay, so now I'm going to just, the shadow kind of comes down here. So I'm just going to simplify that a little. Okay. Simplifying that shadow a little, because it was a little too confusing where the shadow was going there. So the shadow kind of comes down and it comes around here, and then there's a little bit there. So this is all light here, and then there's a bit of the corner there. It was getting a little too complicated, the shadow. So now I just want to maybe add a little bit of some color to the shadow. So I'll use a little bit of my favorite purple mix, the cobalt and quinacridone red, and just kind of put in some purple in the shadow just to make it a little more fun. And showing that that petal's a little bit lighter, but it's still in the shadow, I'll add a little more white and cobalt to this one here, and this one here. And sometimes I find when I'm working with a white flower like this, it gets really hard to get the highlight to stand up on top. It blends into the white paint so much. So what I do is I don't really have, you know, the patience to wait for it to dry. So I put out some more white paint. And I get out my palette knife, which I need to get some new palette knives because these are kind of warpy, but nevertheless I'll get some white paint like this and a little bit of that yellow, something real bright. Not too much though, you don't want it to be a whole different color. But I'm just trying to get that white nice and bright, clean. And I'll sometimes just go to my painting and get that on there better, because it just seems to just keep mixing and turning into gray. So I'll get some real nice bright whites, and I'll get it on the edges too. So I see that's bright, that's super bright, and then right here's bright. So get that there, and then I'll use the edge of my palette knife, just getting some paint right on the edge, and I can, you know, go and really get those edges to stand out too. So even if I were to leave them like that and not touch those brush strokes, at least it's more interesting than a bunch of little brush strokes that don't really, you know, add up to anything. So I'm going to do the same with the yellow, because the underpaint was sort of mixing in, and so if that happens, you can scrape it off and paint over it. But again, I'll just take some of this yellow, gonna mix a little bit of, you know, the white into it just to get it nice, a nice bright yellow highlight. And I'm just gonna put a nice blob of that yellow paint down. And I can do the same with the green. While I'm at it, I'll add a little bit of that Viridian to my white, and add a few nice shocking, you know, bold marks to the green. So that looks a lot more lively and loose. And then I'm going to just get my white brush again and a clean paper towel, and I'll just, this little blob here I'll remove, and you know, I could be real bold and just leave it the way it is, but I'll soften some of those marks there. So that's one way to get around it. If you can't get that white on there and you don't have time to wait, just, you know, get your palette knife and dab it on. And then I'll add a little bit of that orange up on the edge here. Here and there it kind of mixes in between the yellow and there's a little bit of a red stroke or two in there, so you can add a little bit of that quinacridone red there. Well, I think that was was more challenging than I thought it would be, but I think it's doable. So I hope that you enjoyed this little lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. And happy painting.